Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to address a few questions I was asked recently which had what I thought was a common theme, and they were all about the numbers in photography. Now, I'm not going to say ignore what I'm going to be talking about here, that you shouldn't look at the technology and the numbers and the analysis of things, but just perhaps put it in a bit of context. What was I asked about? Well, my old 5DS here, 2015 camera. Somebody asked me, wasn't I concerned about its relatively poor DxO mark score, given I still use this for my commercial architectural work and industrial photography as well. I've also been asked about, what was I, how important were the megapixel, 50 megapixels of this? What about the R5 and various other cameras and things? And they all had a common theme. And I've got a whole load of stuff about printing as well, asking why my paper reviews didn't include gamut volumes when I produced profiles and stuff. And these are all numerical aspects which have some interest to people, but I would say are often overly taken to influence people's decisions, what kit to get, what to use, and that there was a common theme of it in that people were looking at the numbers too carefully and not what they mean. It's all about context. Whenever I include in reviews, and these are the longer written reviews I do as well as the videos. The videos are, are sort of often supplementary to the longer reviews. But wherever I write the longer articles, quite a lot of effort goes into explaining the numbers that I'm putting in these and what they mean and whether they're relevant to you. And quite often I don't include stuff because I think, well, it's just not helpful to people. Now, that doesn't mean it's not interesting, but it's a matter of relevance. A lot of the stuff I produce has a general theme of helping people take better photos, print better photos, appreciate the photos more, irrespective of topic. Now, I do landscape, I do architecture, I do things like that. I don't do people, for example. So I wouldn't dream of telling people the best way to do studio lighting or portrait photography. But some of the principles I cover in printing and things like that are perfectly relevant as well. Just because they're different subjects doesn't mean that the same underlying principles don't apply. I should perhaps give a bit about my own background as a photographer. I've been a professional photographer for over 20 years now. In fact, 20 years this month. So yeah, only just over 20 years. My previous background is a scientific background. I've done research. I used to be an electronics design engineer, a geophysicist. I've designed geophysical survey equipment. So I've designed electronics that has to be used in the field. So I've got a lot of technical engineering experience, but I've also got engineering management experience, and that tempers some of my natural sort of inquiry, getting everything precise, an attitude that if you bring it over from engineering into photography can lead you up a bit of areas that are not worth exploring, I'm going to say, looking at all kinds of things like noise figures for sensors. Interesting, but how much do they actually make of a difference to your photography? I'm going to say not necessarily that much. But anyway, my background comes from a technical background. That means I appreciate the technology, and that in a way I appreciate it, but I know when to ignore it. Because when it comes down to it, I take photos that are meant to be good photos. Now, there's always a technical aspect to taking good photos. And don't think for a moment that my saying stop worrying about the numbers means that you shouldn't look at good exposure, how to process your images, new tools that may have come along. But it's just, they are there as a means to an end, not necessarily as a thing in of itself. So, photography is a hobby for engineers. There are risks. I've known over the years and still know quite a lot of people with a much more rigorous engineering background than I have who've stayed in the area. And they tend to, if they're interested in photography, they fall into two camps. Those which, like myself, go, well, the engineering is interesting. That concentration on the technology is useful, interesting, but I take photos to take photos for whatever reason I want. And there are others who want to know about all the detail. Stuff like colour management is a natural attraction to people of an engineering bent. The capabilities here, or the possibilities I should say, of spending loads and loads of time perfecting profiles and showing next to no difference in actual prints is endless. You can do lots of stuff like this. Now, I do lots of technical stuff. I did just recently a video looking and an article looking at printer resolution. Now, this is one of the test pictures from it that I used. I print lots of prints of. I've got pictures, but I haven't got lots of measurements, because the problem is it's very easy to collect data, but deriving meaning from data is an altogether different thing. So, what areas I mentioned right at the start. Profiling, it's, you couldn't spend ages doing stuff like this. You needn't spend that much money necessarily. If you want to get into a system like Argyle CMS, superb software, open source software, it's absolutely great, but you need to put a lot of effort into using it. Well, if you want to put that effort in, by all means go for it, but don't use it as a distraction from actually what you're printing. So if you say, well, I'm going to do a lot of time spent looking at making printer profiles and the like, and of course once I get all the printer profiles done, well, that's it, I can print my photos. Yeah, that's great, as long as the photos are worth printing. The best profiling colour management in the world won't make rubbish photos look great when you print them. You have to come back to that actual why you're taking pictures. What are you going to do with them? If I look at cameras, the bit that I was asked about, why was I still using this particular camera and DxO Mark? Now, I've in the past worked with DxO, quite a few bits of their software I've helped when developing and looking at, but I see the DxO Mark figures as interesting. They show trends in sensor development. They show all kinds of interesting stuff. Of course, there is how the figures are created and stuff, but it's the use of these figures that I always have some difficulty with. It is people deciding that camera X is better than camera Y because of a particular score. There is so much more to that. Once again, it's about context. It's figures like that that are useful, but only in certain areas, and they get over-interpreted. In colour management, for example, typically I see some paper reviews where they give you gamut volumes for a particular paper after it's been profiled on a particular printer. Does that gamut volume number, usually some arbitrarily large and precise looking number, does that mean anything? Does it actually tell you that two papers, that one has a gamut volume of 857,000, another one has a gamut volume of 842,000? Does it tell you anything about how the prints are going to look different? Now, unless you're doing contract proofing and you're really concerned with the numbers and measuring variances and things like that, that's an entirely different area. If you're producing pictures that look great, then stuff like that is pretty much irrelevant. Most graphs and things you see like that are put there to look good. Probably not much more than that. I know that if I'm doing a review of something, I'll incorporate a few of these graphs from and charts from my testing. I put them partly there because I have explained what they're doing, but I also put them there because I know that some people like to see graphs and charts. They give that sort of spurious sense of authority. Now, these happen to be ones that I'm happy to explain, but there can be all kinds of charts that you can include in stuff. And this goes for sensor, goes for lenses as well. Lens MTF charts, another one that people love to pore over. Without context and knowing how those charts were created and what they actually mean, just looking at MTF charts really doesn't tell you that much about a lens. It certainly doesn't tell you as much as actually going out and taking a photograph or two with it. Subject you know well, perhaps, looking at aspects of the lens that you want. Now, I've talked before about how people describe lenses. They tell me, this lens has a particular look about it. That's great. I go, what do you mean by that? Now that's my sort of inner scientific engineering bit coming out, wanting to know exactly, well, what do they mean? If this lens is so special, what's going on? Now, you might think, well, Keith, you've just given the answer there. MTF charts and all these other various bits of distortion charts and things for lenses. You've given all this information already and you've just dismissed it. I've dismissed it being taken out of context. I want to know when somebody says to me, I like the look of this lens because of such and such. I want to know what they mean. What difference does it make to their photography? Now, a few years ago, I would have tried to look for numbers and go, well, yes, this lens. And I've realised it's futile. That what people think about lenses and different stuff like that is as different as the weather. You can never know. Much as if I look at a picture and somebody goes, that's an astounding picture you've got there, Keith. Do I know why they think it's great, why they really like it? No, I don't. I've no idea. It's all that uncertainty in it. And it's all that sort of, I suppose, vague, fluffy stuff about the bits of photography that makes people of a technical bent slightly uncomfortable and want to nail it down. Now, I can agree with that. I do bits of the sort of technical side of things, but it has an aim and it needs, if I'm going to sort of mention it in articles, reviews and videos and the likes, I've got to explain why it's important. It really does matter. A good example for colour management. Hopefully this makes it a bit clearer. With colour management, let's say monitor calibration. Monitor calibration, you have a device which measures the light coming out the screen. The software puts various colours on the screen. The device measures it. The software knows what colours it's sent to the screen. It knows what colours have been measured off the device. And between the two of them, it works out the characteristics of the screen, produces a profile. That's calibrating, profiling your monitor. That's great. What about the software that you get to do it? Well, actually, it really doesn't need to do much more than you just say, well, I want it setting to roughly these settings. Some software will make it nice and easy and go, great, here it is, his typical photographer's settings. That's great, you can use that. When I look at software, particularly software that comes in different versions, Spider monitor calibrators, they had different versions, essentially the same calibration device but different software. What settings should you use? Should you get the top flight bit of software that has all kinds of adjustments and settings, or should you just go for the basic one? Well, I've always reckoned that if you find in monitor calibration software some settings that you don't know what they are, and unless it's explained to you, and the data color software always was pretty good at explaining the why as well as the as well as the how. But if you don't know what it means, take it as a good assumption that you should stick with the defaults. Once you know enough to know whether you need particular settings, then maybe these settings will be useful. Maybe they won't. Why might they not be useful? We've got, of course, and I had to bring it in at some point, the dead hand of marketing. This is writ large over everything in photography. I'm reminded quite often when I see camera specifications and other specifications of all the nonsense you used to get in hi-fi systems in the 80s, 90s, back when my hearing was much better and I could supposedly tell the difference between things much easier. Always a matter of taste. But some of the nonsense that used to come out in hi-fi marketing, well, that was it. That's been carried over into cameras to some extent. And you get it, as I say, there's paper reviews, you get the meaningless precision in measurements, lens reviews, you get bits and pieces that you get sort of distortion measurements that really don't mean that much. As opposed to actually just looking at some pictures and see what the effects are. But All marketing is aimed at selling you stuff. The people who do the marketing know that a significant market for this sort of stuff is people who will be influenced and swayed by numbers. You don't have to explain what they are. Hey, look, our printer has extra inks, must be better. It might be, might not be. I've got more megapixels, that makes for a better camera. Sometimes, sometimes not. I've got such and such an aperture of a lens. Does that make it better? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You need to put context, as I said, right the way through the thing. Embrace the photography. Look for pictures that excite you, that interest you, that have an emotional impact on you. Use the technology to your benefit. Where it's useful, it's useful. I mean, the specifications thing, printer specifications, the highest print quality modes. There are aspects of specifications for equipment, and I won't say what it is because I've come across this several times. And I know from talking to people at the companies that high-end detailed specifications have been added in purely for marketing purposes. Yeah, it is, you know, your device goes up to 9, well, the dials on ours go up to 11. If you know the reference for dials going up to 11, you'll know exactly what I mean by it. There are too many examples of that. And unfortunately, there are also lots of people who are influenced by dials that go up to 11. I'm sure I've been guilty of it myself. I try not to because I try and understand the technology. And in some of these videos and the other, and I try and explain the technology as to why it's relevant. Talking of the 50 megapixel of this, by the way, I've got a test I did a few years ago looking at print resolution versus megapixel in terms of real prints. I was having a clear out the other day and I found the test prints for it. So I will come back and I'll do a video looking at megapixels and print resolution with some actual real prints, because like all of these things, real photographs or real prints generally trump the arguments you see on forums. Anyway, hopefully that's enough of a rant. I am not saying that if you're interested in the numbers, you're wrong. I am saying if you're interested in the numbers and you don't understand what they actually mean, then you may well be mistaken in your interpretation and assignment of importance to those numbers. Understand the technology as much as you feel you need to, but as I say, when it comes back to it, it's about taking great photos. We all have our different ways of doing it. Please do keep asking questions like this. Some of them set me off more than others, and I'm always looking for interesting stuff that people go, you know, oh, what about such and such? So ask your questions, subscribe to the channel, please, and thanks for watching. Cheers.